We are going to do a short and sweet awareness through movement lesson. This lesson focuses on the area of the neck and shoulders, but also involves the hips and the low back, and is a fairly simple, basic lesson for someone that's new to the practice and is hopefully still interesting and pleasant for someone that has more experience with these kinds of lessons. The only tool that you need for this lesson is curiosity. And it's important you really take your time with the instructions so that you can feel yourself. The point of the lessons is not to accomplish a certain action or to do a movement in a particular way. Rather, the movements are a little container for you to observe yourself and maybe learn something about how you organize yourself for certain movements, where your breathing changes, where you might exert unnecessary amounts of effort to acquire a certain position. So move slowly, and I will give you opportunities to rest. And the rests are for your brain. The Feldenkrais method is about a learning process, and so if you were going to learn anything, it would be important that you pause and process and give your brain a little break so you can integrate what you've learned and not get flooded with information. So you'll have many opportunities to rest. If you find yourself getting agitated or checking out or sleeping, you might discern that it's time for you to take your own rest. So feel free to do that when you need. Most importantly, as we go through this lesson, know that your comfort is very important to promote the right conditions for learning. So keep checking in on yourself to make sure that the experience is pleasant and you feel comfortable. So we begin laying on the floor, on the back, with the legs long and the arms long by our sides. And if this is a position that's not comfortable for you, then keep your knees bent with your feet standing. And give yourself a little time to adjust to this relationship with gravity, to feel the way that your nervous system adjusts and the way that some parts of you begin to relax quite quickly and other parts of you are a bit slower. And you can feel in particular the parts of you that remain a little bit contracted even though you're in a resting position, and the parts of you that can give their weight to the floor quite fully. And now in particular, bring your attention to the back of your hips. This is an area that you'll hear me calling your pelvis. The pelvis is the skeletal structure, being the back of your hips, the sides, the bottom, the fronts. So bring your attention to your hips and feel the way the right and the left side make contact with the floor, and in particular notice if one side makes a different kind of contact or actually seems to go down more than the other side. And then follow your attention from the back of the right side of your pelvis or your right hip joint, if that's an area that you're familiar with, and feel down the length of your right leg to your right heel. And notice the way that your right leg makes contact with the floor. And if your legs are bent, then you can continue to feel your leg from the back of your hip to the bottom of your foot. And notice the relative tension or contraction, muscular contractions in the right leg. And then bring your attention over to the back of the left side of your pelvis and feel down the left leg to the left foot or the left heel. And notice if there's differences in the way that you experience one leg or the other leg. If one leg is more comfortable or just feels different, maybe it's a different position that stands out to you. And then bring your attention to the back of your pelvis, and now this time start sensing upwards along the line of your low back and then to your middle back. And this area of your middle back is your thoracic spine, and it's the area that your rib joints connect to your spine. So see if you can feel your ribs in the back touching the floor. And if you can, do you feel it differently on the right or the left side? Maybe you feel more of yourself on the left or the right side. And then continue sensing up your middle back to your upper back, and in particular, the area where your spine passes between each of your shoulders. And then from there, where your spine becomes the bottom of your neck, and then the bones of your neck, and then see if you can feel where your neck connects to the back of your skull. And roll your head a little bit to the left and to the right, and see if it's easier in one direction or the other. And then leave that and feel how your right shoulder is making contact with the floor. And see if you can feel the bone on the back of your shoulder blade, making contact with the floor. And what shape your shoulder blade feels like. Maybe it's a circle or a triangle. Maybe it's not a shape at all, maybe it's just one point. And then feel from the back of your right shoulder to the outer edge of your right shoulder. And feel if the outer edge of your shoulder comes away from the floor. And then also the top part of your shoulder. And how that slopes away from the floor. And then try to feel where your upper arm connects to the joint of your shoulder. And from your upper arm to your elbow, to your lower arm, to your hand. And then bring your attention to your left shoulder. And feel the way that the left shoulder blade makes contact with the floor. And again, how you sense the shape of that bone, or if it's more of a specific point or place, less of a shape. And then sense your outer edge of your shoulder and the top of the shoulder. And from the left shoulder, the way that your left arm makes contact down to your hand. And then finally, bring your attention to the way that you're breathing without needing to change it. And then you could consider, if you feel like you want to change it, what would you do? Is there a way that you could change how you're breathing that would allow you to feel more comfortable? And then see if you can get a sense of your whole self making contact with the floor as you also sense the movement of your breathing. And start to listen carefully for all the parts of you that are affected by your breathing. And then leave that and roll over onto your right side and bend your knees in front of you so that your knees are more or less perpendicular to your body and your feet are more or less below your knees. And then you can choose to either have your head on the floor if that's okay with your neck. It might be nicer to put a flat cushion under your head, or if you don't have a flat cushion, maybe a few towels. To start with, you're going to want your bottom arm in front of you, so don't lay on your bottom arm yet, though you might be able to do that later. And instead have your bottom arm in front of you and then put your top arm on top of your bottom arm. And feel the way that you're laying on your side and make any adjustments you need so that there's minimal contraction, let's say, around your groin or your low back, maybe your shoulders. See how comfortable you can be on your side, but still actually be on your side and not falling forward or falling back. And see that more or less your head is in line with your neck. Your head isn't forward. You're not in the fetal position. And then start to do a movement of your top shoulder, your left shoulder, so that as you bring your shoulder forward, meaning in front of you, your left arm starts to slide along your right arm, and your left hand starts to slide along your right hand. And then you use your shoulder to bring your arm back where it was. And so again, the movement is slow, and it also can be quite small. And in fact, have the movement be as small as you need so that you can be clear about the feeling of your top shoulder moving. Have your arm comfortably straight, so it's not that you're bending and unbending the elbow, but rather that you're sliding the top hand along the bottom hand. The top arm will slide away from you in front of your chest, and then will slide toward you. And go slowly. Go maybe even slower than you think you should. Pay attention to how you've chosen to breathe. When you lengthen your left arm forward, does that evoke an inhale or an exhale? And then also pay attention to what other parts follow the movement of your shoulder. Is there a shift in your head? Is there a shift in the side of you? Maybe there's a shift in your hips or your legs. Don't try to move other parts of you. Just notice if there's other parts of you that respond to the movement of your shoulder. And then take a little rest here on your side. Have your arms in whatever position they're comfortable. What do you notice about your breathing in this situation as you lay on your side? What's different from when you were laying on your back? Now have your top hand comfortably in front of you. It could be just on the floor in front of your chest with your elbow bent, or whatever position you can have your arm comfortably resting in front of you, so that you have a little bit of stability as you now begin to do a movement of your pelvis. And now feel your left hip, that's your top hip, and start to do a movement of shifting your left hip a little bit forward and then back to where it was. See if your top knee will slide a little bit along the bottom knee. And the movement is similar to what you were doing with your shoulder, except now it's your hip. And just do what you can do easily. Don't do your best work. Your best work is often distracting from the learning process. So you just do what you can do in a slow, comfortable way. If the movement feels sticky or jerky, do less. The movement could be so small that maybe someone in the room doesn't even see it, but you feel it. That's the most important thing, is that you can sense what you're doing. And see, how does it slide? And as it's sliding, as your hip is sliding forward and then back, what other parts of you respond to this movement? Okay, and then leave that and take a little rest on your side. Now again, have both of your arms outstretched in front of you on the floor, comfortably straight. And check that your head can be heavy on the cushion. You want to be sure there's no contraction in your neck or in your chest. You want to check that you're not sucking in the mouth at all or pushing your teeth together. Your eyebrows are soft. And then start to do a movement of lifting your left arm up toward the ceiling, very gently and slowly. Keep your right arm resting on the floor. And then bring your arm back down to meet the other arm. And do this a few times, and again notice as you lift your left arm up to the ceiling, does that evoke an inhale or an exhale? See if for now you can keep your whole self quiet and really listen for the movement of your shoulder as you bring your arm up to the ceiling and then bring it back down. How do you have to move your shoulder to comfortably do this movement? And then start to play with making the movement broader. So you start to bring your arm up to the ceiling and then back behind you. Not so much that you're stretching or that you have any strong sensations, just as far as you can without a lot of movement in other places and without any stretching. And then go back and forth so that you really experience your comfortable range. Like it's a movement you could do all day because it doesn't require a lot of extraneous movements and it doesn't require effort. And bringing the arm slightly back behind you, back up to the ceiling, and then down in front of you again. And then bring your arm up to the ceiling again and leave it there. And this time do a movement of bringing the arm in the direction of your head and then the direction of your hip. So we could call that a vertical line. And again, see how does that go. Not to the point that there's any cracking or bumping or stuttering of your shoulder, but just what's a smooth range, a smooth movement. And then bring your arm down to the other arm and pause for a moment. And now open your eyes and look at your top hand and have your left arm on top of your right arm again, your left hand on top of your right hand. And now continue doing the movement of bringing your left arm up to the ceiling and back behind you, but only go back as far as you can keep looking with your eyes. So you'll follow the movement of your arm with your eyes and with your head. And then you continue following with your eyes and your head as you come back. And again, in the Feldenkrais method, it's not important that we learn a certain kind of breathing. What we're interested in is optimizing our ability to breathe in many different scenarios and conditions. So just check in with yourself that you're breathing and that it's something that feels comfortable, it's not forced, it's not regulated. And notice if there's a change in the quality or even the range of movement when you add in your head and eyes. And then bring your arm down and pause for a moment. And now this time we're going to start to alternate. So keep your face facing forward as you bring your arm back. And then when you bring your arm forward, start to rotate your head so that your face goes toward the ceiling. And see if you can find a relationship between those movements. So they're not two arbitrary movements. First I move my head, first then I move my arm. But you start to listen so it's like a mechanism. That your head moves at the same time and the same velocity as your arm. And again, check that you're doing what you think that you're doing. Are you actually moving from the shoulder, or have you started to use a different part of you? And if so, can you simplify the movement until it's really just the shoulder and the head and the eyes that are involved. Yeah, and then a couple times go back to the previous movement of having the arm and the head and the eyes move together, forward and back. And then rest for a moment on your side. See if there's been a change in your breathing. See if you can sense any micro contractions in your body that aren't actually serving a specific purpose. If there's an area that you might be contracting slightly, and just by identifying that area, you might find that you can start to soften that area. And then keep your left hand resting on the floor somewhere in front of you. And a few times, just very small, very gentle, see how you can just rotate your head so that your head is extremely heavy and you can feel the pressure on the side and then the back of your head changing as you rotate your neck. You can also turn your eyes with your head so you look in the direction of the ceiling. And this time you keep your shoulder quiet, you keep your hip quiet, and you just see what's possible. For many people, there's not going to be a very large range of motion here. It's not going to be very easy to rotate the head without taking the shoulder with it. So just see what's possible for you and still manageable and comfortable. When you rotate your head, do you also lift your chin? Do you change the angle of the back of your neck? And is it possible that you can rotate your head while keeping your nose on the same plane? If you have hair on your head, you might notice that there's a sound of your hair kind of smushing into the floor. See if you can feel the difference between rotating your head with your chin lifted and the back of your neck shortened, or if you rotate your head with your ears more or less staying on the same plane without the chin tilting up or tilting down. That's it. Okay. And then take a little rest here on your side. Now, a few times, start to bring the left hip or the left side of your pelvis back and then to where it was again. And now again, see if you can do the movement of just your pelvis. What does it mean to keep the back and the shoulder and the head quiet, and do the movement as small as you need so that it's just the hip. What does it even mean to move just the hip? If that seems difficult or confusing, you might put your left hand on the side of your hip and then see if that helps you get a sense of what part of you can move. And then as you continue doing this movement of your hip, let your left knee, your top knee, follow the movement of your hip. Again, check that you're not rolling onto your back, you're not moving your back or your shoulder or your head, but you're really trying to find out how to differentiate. So it's just a movement of the hip. What does it mean to just move the hip in a way that's smooth and comfortable, not a big movement for some of you? And then rest for a moment. And then again, have both arms in front of you on the floor, comfortably straight, your left hand on your right hand. And a few times go back to the first movement of bringing your left arm up to the ceiling and back behind you, and follow with your head and your eyes, and then come back. And get a sense of how that's coming along, if it feels easier, if it feels smoother, if there's any change in how you're doing that. And then bring your arm down again, left hand on top of right. And now this time, you will repeat the movement, except find the moment where you bring your arm back, and you can't bring it back anymore without a stretch or an effort. And at that moment, bring your hip back and let your knee start to lift a little bit toward the ceiling. So bring the arm back with the head and the eyes until the point that it feels like the end of the comfortable range, and then start to lift your left knee away from your right knee. Let your left hip roll back and see if that allows you to bring your arm back any further. And now to reverse it, again, bring your hip forward, bring your knee down, and start to rotate along your spine. Move your shoulder, your arm, and your head. And play with that a few times on your own. Find the breathing that suits the movement the best. And play with what is that moment that bringing the hip in facilitates the movement to be fuller. See if you can track the movement of your head in relation to your shoulder. Does your head move at the same moment that your shoulder does? Does it move first? Play a little bit with how you would like your individual parts to begin to communicate. You can play with it, try some things out, see what suits you the best, give your brain a few options, so that maybe you turn the head first and then the shoulder and then the hip. Maybe a few times you take the hip and the head and then the shoulder, and find out, is there a way of organizing yourself that really feels more efficient or more pleasant than another way. You can also play with your breathing. If you're doing your breathing in a certain way, you could see, okay, well, what's different if I hold my breath? What's different if I do the opposite breathing? If you're breathing a lot in your chest, you could say, oh, what happens if I start to breathe in my belly? Yeah, so just take a little bit more time to get curious about if you can actually teach yourself to do something differently than how you are doing it now. And then the next time you bring your arm back, see if you can use the movement of your arm and your knee lifting and roll onto your back and take a rest on your back. Let your knee lift. Let your hips roll back toward the floor and take a little rest on your back. Lengthen out your legs, bring your arms by your sides. You might want to feel yourself without the cushion under your head if you have it under your head. And let yourself settle again into the floor. And listen for any changes in the way that you make contact. The parts of you that give their weight the fullest, the parts of you that were a little contracted before, the left and the right side of your pelvis, the left and the right side of your rib cage. And also really pay attention to the way your shoulders are touching the floor, the right shoulder and the left shoulder, the shoulder blades, the outer edge of the shoulders, the upper edge of the shoulders. And feel the sides of your neck and even the sides of your face. And start to compare the left and the right side. Roll your head a little bit left and right again. See how you do that rotation and if it feels more comfortable or just different rolling in one way or the other way. Where do you sense the movement when you're rotating your head? How far down yourself is there a response? Leave the head and shift your attention back to your breathing. see if there's a difference in the way you sense your breathing on the left and the right side of you. This is a nice opportunity to check in with yourself in a different way by observing your learning process, observing how you are approaching this experience. If there's any way that you feel you might be holding yourself back or limiting yourself, maybe it's a certain repetitive thought, maybe it's a sleepiness, maybe it's something else. Bear in mind that not only do we work with the brain neurologically to improve our mobility, but we also engage in a very interesting learning process. And just by pausing and reflecting on what is the influence of this experience, we can get a lot of insight about our overall state beyond just our physical state. Now roll onto the same side again, onto your left side, and you might set yourself up with the cushion again. You might choose to have your head on your arm this time, or even on the floor, and have your knees bent in front of you with your feet more or less under your knees, unless that's uncomfortable for some reason on your knees or on your hips, and have your arms outstretched in front of you, left hand on top of the right hand. And then a few times retest the first movement. So keep as much of you quiet as possible and find out how you can lift your arm up toward the ceiling and back behind you in your comfortable range. See how you do that now. Not by deliberately moving other parts, by listening to what other parts seem to begin to naturally contribute to the movement of your shoulder and your arm. And see how far back can you bring your arm without a stretch or any strain, without a shift in how you're breathing. That's it. And then come back and bring your arm down in front of you again. Now this time stand your left hand, your top hand, on the floor in front of you with your elbow bent. And you're going to do a movement of sliding. I think of it as like a little exploration. You can imagine that your left hand is a little vehicle that's about to go exploring some interesting countryside, and you might encounter some hills and some valleys and some great savanna. So keep your hand in contact with whatever it is it's touching, and start to do a movement of sliding your hand along the floor in front of you. Keep your elbow comfortably bent. Slide the hand in the direction of your head. So we'll call that direction upward. And you might encounter your other arm, you might encounter a cushion. Whatever your hand encounters, just gently let your hand feel what it feels. So the movement is more, we'll call it more vertical. And just slide your hand and your arm upward as much as you can comfortably, and then back to where you started. Go slowly so that you can stay connected to what it is that you're doing. It's not an arbitrary movement. I'm just moving my hand. No, you're moving your hand and listening to, do you feel a relationship to the movement of your hand with your chest? Do you feel something in your ribs, maybe even your hip, maybe some other part of you? So find out what you can discover from this movement. Find out if you cannot lift your hand at all. Right? Keep your shoulder and your chest as comfortable and soft as possible, and really just creeping and sliding your left hand. And then if you can comfortably move your hand in front of your face, then you might start to continue to lengthen your hand in front of your face and then in the area above your head, still in contact with the floor. And if this is a movement that you can do comfortably, then start to listen to what has to change. If you wanted your hand to start to move in the area above your head on the floor, how would you have to negotiate or organize your head, your ribs? And if doing that movement just feels painful or uncomfortable, it's important you just stay in the range that feels good. That's where your learning curve is. So you slide your hand along the floor in front of you and upward above your head. And keep listening for how far above your head on the floor you can comfortably reach without straining anywhere. Again, check what do you choose to do with your breathing. Particularly if you're focusing your attention, you might notice that your breathing gets shallow, or you sort of halt your breathing for a moment. So find out if your breathing can correspond with the movement. And then if it's a movement that's really easy for you, then you always have the option of playing with doing something a little bit differently. And particularly if you have experience with the Feldenkrais method, and it's easy for you to observe what it is that you do habitually, then you can start to see, okay, well, what if I did something a little bit differently? Something different with the head, the neck, the collarbones. And then if you haven't already, start to play with what happens if you allow your trunk to start to roll backwards slightly in the direction of the floor behind you. And at what point does your back get involved? Where do you start to feel a rotation? And is there some point as your arm is reaching above your head, and now for some of you maybe slightly back behind you, is there some point that your knee needs to get involved? And you can imagine if you wanted to roll onto your back in this situation, how could you do this in the laziest, most effortless way? And then leave that and take a rest on your side. How do you feel yourself making contact on the right side of you, on the side that you're leaning on? Is there movement of your breathing on the right side, on the side you're leaning on, or is it more that you're breathing on the left side of you? Now bring both of your arms out in front of you on the floor again, and have your knees bent in front of you, your feet more or less under your knees. And again, a few times bring your arm back as far as you can comfortably, up to the floor, or rather up to the ceiling, and then back behind you. And then when you feel the place that your arm goes back comfortably without a stretch or effort, pause there for a moment and hold the arm in that place, and continuing to breathe in and out. And then back off a bit. So don't go quite that far. Come forward a little bit more than your comfortable place. So for many of you, that'll be with your arm toward the ceiling, or it might be a little bit back toward the floor, but a place that you can feel your arm connects to your shoulder and it's comfortable, stable place. There's no stretch or effort to hold it there. Because now you're going to do a sort of unique movement of the whole arm in a circle. So sometimes it's useful to picture that you have like a paintbrush fingers, as though you wanted to paint a big circle on the ceiling, or it might be kind of where the ceiling and the wall meet, depending on your angle. But start very slowly and begin to describe the shape of a large circle along the ceiling, and again feeling that you do the movement not to your crackling and popping, but just where it's really smooth and easy. See what size of a circle you've chosen. And if you're doing a very small circle, find out what changes if you make the circle bigger. And if you're doing a big circle, what happens if you try doing a very small circle? If it makes it easier to visualize that place that your arm was extended in the air, you could think of that as the midpoint of your circle. And then you want to draw a circle around that midpoint. Keep checking that it's a circle that you're making and it's not a diamond shape or a oval or a square. So you might need to keep adjusting the size of your circle so that it's circular. And particularly if it gets sticky or funny, you might change your breathing, so you want to keep checking that there's no unnecessary contractions or limitations in your breathing. And then if you find that place that feels pretty smooth, then pause and then start to make the circle in the opposite direction and see what's different about that. If you're not sure the speed you should be going, the best thing to do is to find out for yourself by testing it out. Go at one speed and then say, okay, now if I went half the speed that I'm going now, could I get more clear information about what I can feel or not? And it's this really kind of interesting game as we work toward improving our sensory ability, really finding out where's that place of learning for us. What speed do we have to go before we actually can really start to sense things that we just couldn't sense before? Leave it and take a rest on your back. And then one last time, come onto your same side again. Have the knees bent in front of you, have your arms long in front of you. And one last time, retest how this movement feels of bringing the arm up to the ceiling and back behind you. See how far you can go back without any strain or stretch. And then retest the other movement that we did, which was vertically. So your arm first up to the ceiling and then in the direction of your head and then the direction of your hip, like you're painting a line across the ceiling. And see if there's a change in that movement. And then bring your arm down in front of you comfortably with the elbow bent, and have both of your arms in a very comfortable position in front of you on the floor. And now start to bring your attention to the way you feel your breathing moving on the left side of you, the top side of you. And without trying to create a movement, can you sense a little response in your top shoulder blade, your left shoulder blade? A response to your breathing. And then once again, come to rest on your back. Feel your contact with the floor and the contact of your breathing with the floor and with the area to the front and to the side of you, and the length of your right and your left leg, and the length of the right and the left side of your spine, and the way that the right and the left side of your pelvis make contact with the floor, and how you feel your right and your left shoulder, the sides of your neck and the sides of your face. And now, when you are ready to transition, slowly bend your knees and roll onto your side and come to sit and come to stand, and spend a little time sensing yourself in standing. Walk around the room, see if you notice anything interesting or different about yourself when you're walking. You could move your arms around, reach your arms forward and up, out to the sides. See if there's a difference in how you move the right and the left arm. And then you can choose to leave it here and allow for the difference on each side to be a continued learning process. You can let your brain register the differences. And later, if you would like to continue the lesson, then I would suggest coming back to the beginning and repeating the lesson again with the opposite instructions. Or you might want to just lay back down on the floor and on the other side, just do the variations that stood out to you, and see how you might have learned something from this first side that you can then transmit to the other side. And whatever you do, enjoy your process in a easy, comfortable, pleasant way. Thank you.